Jason Harper got slapped with an outrageous $200 parking fine on his own property. The HOA secretary, Karen Benson, and her smug little council had been terrorizing the whole neighborhood with arbitrary rules and relentless fines. But Jason had a secret that flipped the script. He owned every single house on the block. And just wait until you see how he used that power to make justice finally prevail. It was one of those long days where the hours just blend together. I'd been running back and forth between contractors, checking on renovation projects, making sure everyone had what they needed. By the time I finally pulled into the neighborhood, it was close to midnight. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that almost feels heavy, like the whole block is holding its breath. I eased my black Ford F-150 into the same spot I'd used for years, right in front of my own house. Not on the grass, not blocking anyone's driveway, not in a fire lane, just in front of my place. It felt almost comforting, like muscle memory. I locked the truck, stretched my shoulders, and told myself I'd finally get to sleep in the next day. Except the next morning, before I even had a sip of coffee, I stepped outside and froze. Something bright and ugly was stuck under my wipers. At first, I thought it was one of those annoying flyers for gutter cleaning or pest control. But no, it was worse, much worse. In bold black letters on neon yellow paper, it read, "Violation notice. You have broken HOA parking rules. Fine, $200. Repeat violations will result in your vehicle being towed." I stood there blinking at the paper like maybe, just maybe, I'd misread it. My brain actually tried to convince me this had to be some sort of mix-up. But the longer I stared, the hotter my chest burned. A fine for parking in front of my own house. My first reaction came out of my mouth before I could stop it. What violation? I parked at my own damn house. I wasn't shouting at anyone in particular, but my voice carried. That's when Mrs. Langdon, my elderly neighbor from across the street, shuffled by with her little dog. She glanced at me, sighed, and said in the most resigned voice, "Don't be surprised, Jason. They've been terrorizing everyone for months." Her words hit like a bucket of cold water. So it wasn't just me. This wasn't some one-off mistake. This was a pattern, a routine. And then, as if the universe wanted to underline the insult, I felt eyes on me. I turned, and sure enough, across the street, in the second-floor office window of the HOA, there she was, Karen Benson, the secretary. Thin frame, sharp features, blonde hair, pulled so tight it looked like it hurt. She was standing there with her arms crossed, staring straight at me. That look on her face, it wasn't just observation, it was satisfaction. The kind of smug little smile people wear when they believe they have power over you. The kind of expression that makes even the calmest person's patience snap like a twig. In that moment, something shifted inside me. This wasn't about a yellow slip anymore. This wasn't about $200. This was about principle, about respect. They had fined me for parking on my own property. It was blatant, arrogant injustice. And I knew this was only the beginning. 3 days later, the mail arrived, and with it, the kind of letter that makes your stomach sink before your eyes even reach the words. I unfolded the envelope and saw it immediately. Fine doubled to $400. Failure to pay will result in legal action and possible eviction. I sank into a chair at my kitchen table, staring at the words as if they might rearrange themselves into something more reasonable. They didn't. My hands clenched around the paper so hard, my knuckles turned pale. And that's when it hit me. It wasn't the money. $400 wouldn't ruin me, wouldn't keep me up at night, wouldn't stop me from going to work or fixing things around the house. No, the real sting came from the contempt behind it, from the arrogance, the sense that someone believed they had the right to dictate every detail of our lives, to intimidate and control people who were just trying to live in peace. I needed air, needed to clear my head. I walked outside and wandered down the street, letting the early morning sun hit my face. And that's when I saw him, Henry, a tenant of mine for more than a decade, sitting on his porch with his elbows on his knees and his head in his hands. He looked up as I approached, and the exhaustion in his eyes stopped me in my tracks. "Jason, I can't take it anymore," he said quietly. "They fined me 6 times for weeds this month, even though I pay someone to take care of the yard. My wife, she cries every night. We're thinking of moving." I felt my chest tighten. My mind tried to process it. 6 fines for weeds? That's not a simple mistake. That's systematic harassment. And it wasn't just Henry. Walking further down the block, I noticed subtle signs of the same frustration in other neighbors. A dropped head, a muttered sigh, kids playing quietly without the usual laughter, someone hurriedly trimming a bush that didn't need it just to avoid a fine. It wasn't the financial burden that struck fear into these people. It was the way the HOA made them feel powerless. Every arbitrary rule, every little penalty, every note on a windshield added weight. The neighborhood that should have been a safe, welcoming place had become a cage. I realized then, with an almost physical ache, that this wasn't just about me. It wasn't just a yellow slip on my truck. The HOA wasn't throwing around fines for fun or efficiency. They were systematically breaking people down, creating fear, and enforcing control over lives that didn't belong to them. The sense of helplessness was crushing. I could feel it in the air, in the quiet tension that hung over the block. For the first time, I understood the true scope of what I was up against. This wasn't petty bureaucracy. It was an abuse of power, and it had real, tangible consequences for real people. I walked back to my house, gripping the fine in my hand, and I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I couldn't just sit by and watch this continue. Something had to change, and whatever it took, I was going to make sure it did. The next evening, I found myself standing outside the HOA meeting room, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. The whole block felt tense, though I was alone on the sidewalk for now. I could hear muffled voices inside, the low hum of discussion. My stomach was a mix of nerves and determination, the kind that makes your hands tingle. This was the moment I'd been preparing for. I pushed open the door, and the room's air felt heavier than the night before. Karen Benson and her little counsel sat behind a long, polished table, papers neatly stacked, pens poised, looking every bit like judges ready to pass sentence. Their expressions were perfectly composed, calculated smiles, subtle nods. But I could sense the quiet confidence in Karen, the smugness that had made my blood boil for days. "Mr. Harper," Karen began, her tone sweetly venomous, "you have an outstanding debt. If you don't pay, we'll be filing a lawsuit." I felt the words sink into the room like a weight, as though she had already decided the outcome. I paused for a moment, letting the tension stretch just enough that it became almost unbearable. My pulse was steady. My next words had to land. I took a deep breath, letting calmness seep into every syllable. "Karen," I said, my voice smooth but carrying an edge of authority, "do you even know who I am?" A flicker of surprise crossed her face, but she quickly masked it with a smirk. "A rule breaker," she replied, almost lazily, as if she expected nothing less from me. I smiled faintly, set my bag down, and reached into it. From the leather folder, I pulled out a stack of documents and placed them firmly on the table. The sound of the papers landing seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet room. I let the pause stretch, making sure every eye in the room was on me. "Actually," I began, keeping my voice calm, deliberate, "I'm the owner of all 48 houses in this neighborhood, including yours. I'm the landlord, and I'm done watching you harass my tenants." The room went dead silent. Time seemed to slow. A couple of board members shifted in their seats, avoiding my gaze. They exchanged glances, subtle but unmistakable. Uncertainty. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Karen's face, once so composed and smug, visibly faltered. Her shoulders tensed, her smirk vanished, replaced by a thin line of disbelief. For the first time, she looked unsure. The power dynamics had shifted so suddenly, it left the room trembling with the anticipation of what would come next. I could feel the tension, the mix of fear and surprise radiating from them. For weeks, they'd believed they were untouchable, orchestrating fines and rules with total authority. And now, all that control had evaporated in an instant. The room wasn't just quiet. It was expectant. Every gaze was locked on me, waiting for the next move, the final word. And I knew at that moment that the hope I had clung to wasn't just my own. It was the hope of everyone on the block. The hope that maybe, just maybe, the nightmare of arbitrary fines and intimidation was about to end. I let a beat pass, letting the weight of my words settle over the room. The board members were frozen, their pens suspended mid-air, the papers in front of them suddenly meaningless. Karen's smug confidence was cracking like thin ice under pressure. "Effective immediately," I continued, my voice steady and firm. "The HOA is dissolved. I've already filed the paperwork. Your ridiculous fines are invalid. And as for you, Karen, you're fired." The room seemed to exhale as Karen shot up from her chair, eyes wide and mouth opening as if to argue. "You can't just—" "I can," I interrupted, holding up the HOA bylaws like a shield of truth. "According to the rules, if all property owners vote to dissolve, the HOA ceases to exist. And since I own all the properties, consider this unanimous." For a moment, it felt like the entire block held its breath. Then, like a dam breaking, the reaction poured over the room. The neighbors erupted. Claps, cheers, and laughter filled the space, bouncing off the walls. Someone pulled out a phone and began recording, capturing the pure relief and disbelief in real time. I spotted Henry in the crowd. He had tears in his eyes, his hands trembling slightly as he wiped at them. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but I heard every word. "Thank you, son. You just saved us." I looked around at the familiar faces, my tenants, my neighbors, some shaking with joy, some laughing, others just staring, stunned by the sudden liberation from months of arbitrary rules. Every person in that room had been carrying invisible weight, the stress of fines and constant scrutiny. Now it was gone. Karen, realizing her power had evaporated, stormed toward the exit. Her pale face betrayed her fury and disbelief. She was shaking, muttering under her breath, but there was nothing she could do. The tide had turned completely. The room settled into a kind of calm chaos. Conversations buzzed with relief, laughter mingling with incredulity. For the first time in months, the neighborhood breathed freely. No more parking tickets slapped on windshields. No more phony fines for weeds or minor infractions. No more intimidation. Just peace. I stepped back and took it all in. The feeling was overwhelming. The months of frustration, the simmering anger, the helplessness that I had felt walking past Henry's porch, all of it came crashing into one clear realization. Sometimes all it takes is a single person standing up and saying enough to stop a cycle of control and intimidation. I felt a warmth in my chest, a quiet pride, not just in myself, but in the resilience of the people around me. It wasn't about proving I was right. It wasn't about asserting power. It was about restoring fairness, protecting a community, and reclaiming dignity. And in that moment, I understood something simple and powerful. Justice isn't always loud. It isn't always immediate. But when it lands, it resonates. The neighborhood was free. The tyranny ended. And I had played my part. I smiled, feeling the satisfaction spread like sunlight across a cloudy morning. Sometimes the simplest acts, standing up, speaking the truth, taking action, can inspire change far beyond what you imagine. And that night, watching my neighbors celebrate, I felt it deeply. That sense of triumph, hope, and possibility. That's the kind of inspiration that doesn't fade. It stays with you.